Welcome to Slaying Excel Dragons video number 53. Hey, these are the videos that accompany the book, and we are done with the chapters in the book. This video is actually an extra video with a couple of extra topics. We're going to talk about define name formulas to create dynamic ranges for charts and array formulas. Now, this video is going to go over some advanced topics, but no better way to finish off a basics book than to look at some advanced topics. All right, let's go over to our Excel workbook. Excelisfun finished. Whoa, I'm using this file, but of course, when you download it, you download the excelisfun start. There's a start one. That's the one you use to practice along. And of course, the finished ones show the finished product. Now, here's our setup. We have a data set, and we want to be able to create a chart and some formulas. And anytime we add new records to the bottom of the data set, we want our charts and formulas to update. Now, we already saw a great solution to this, I think, back in chapter 3. Excel table feature automatically does that. That's a totally great way to go. The table feature works, 95% of the time, 98% of the time. There are some situations when you start removing records, particularly when you remove all the records and then have a new data set dumped in the location where the old data set is. Then the table feature dynamic range, that method of getting a dynamic range doesn't work so well. So this method works in all situations. Now, how are we going to get a dynamic range? Well, back in the video on the index function, we actually saw how to use the index function to create a dynamic range. So we're going to use the ideas from the index video here. The only difference is we're then going to take those defined, we're going to take those dynamic range formulas and use them in a defined name. Then put them in a chart, then put them in a formula. Now, we've seen how to name a range. For example, I could highlight this range and come up here and call this, I already have a range called date in here, so I'm going to say date, date. But you highlight any range, go up to the name box, type a name, and hit enter. And that's a defined name. Now, let's go look at that defined name. The keyboard shortcut, actually, you could go to Formulas, Name Manager, or Control F3. Now, here's our list of names. We actually did a bunch with names earlier in the book. But there it is, date, date. I'm going to click Edit. This is the window we'll be working in when we create our define name formulas. But look at this. When we did this just using the name box, it actually has a formula there. This formula is just equals sheet name and a range. But guess what? In this refers to text box, you can create any formula you want. So we're going to go create a formula down here for a dynamic range, and then copy it from our cells and paste it up here. Sometimes it's just easier to work in the cells than a dialog box. I'm going to hit cancel, and I'm going to delete this. Oh yeah, delete. And then close. All right. One more thing about this video is I'm going to keep my ranges very small just to fit everything on the screen for the video. If you really have a data set that is going to grow by a lot, there may be some data there, but you want to extend your range below as far as you need to go to accommodate the maximum number of records. But for this video, all I'm going to do is I'm going to go 2 rows below just so I can keep it fit on the screen. All right, let's come down here. Now, the index function, as we saw before, let's remind ourselves. It's a lookup function. You give it an array or a range. I'm just going to highlight this range right here, and that's the range we're going to use for our formulas. I'm going to hit the F4 key to lock it, because later when we copy this up into the define name dialog box, we need them locked. There's the array, comma. Now, as you recall from our index video, index is a lookup function where you tell it the row or column number, and it will deliver. So, for example, in this range right here, if I say give me the 9th item from here to here, 9th item, number 9, it will return the actual value. Now, let's look at a tricky way to get the row where the last item is sitting. For us, it's not the actual row headers. It's not actually 10. It's the relative position in the list. So it's actually 9. Guess what? I'm going to use count. The count function can count all of the non-empty cells. So I'm going to highlight that same range and hit F4. Well, right now, it's just going to count 9 items. Boom, the actual position of the last one. Now, count is going to deliver the row number. That array or range has the values we want. Let's just enter this, Control Enter. And look, of course, it's going to return that last item. That's actually a great formula to return the last item in a list if you want. This method of getting the last item in the list, however, doesn't work if there's blanks. You'd have to switch over to a different type of formula. But for most data sets, this is a very common construction for creating dynamic ranges. All right, but I thought we were going to create a dynamic range. All this index is doing is getting that last value. No way. We can, as we saw in our index video, if we put this little piece right here into the context of a cell reference, index knows to return the cell reference instead of the value. Let me show you what I mean here. If I go equals A2 colon A10, if we take that index and plop it right there, because there's a colon, the index is programmed to return a cell reference, not a value. So I'm going to kind of cheat here. I'm going to copy this, A colon. I'm going to click Escape. Click down here, F2. I'm going to click right before the equal sign, after the equal sign and before the I, and Control V. Now I need to lock this A2, so I'm going to hit F4. And there it is. Because we just saw a second ago how index actually in this cell was retrieving the value. But because there's that colon there, it's going to return the cell reference. Let's prove it to ourselves. Let's highlight this and hit the F9 key. No way. It is not returning just the last value. It's returning all the values. Now, of course, those are serial numbers because we know under dates are serial numbers. I'm going to Control Z. I'm going to enter this. Now, this is a range of values. If I hit Enter, it gives me a value error because you can't enter a range of values into a cell. But I'm going to Control Shift Enter just so we can run Formula Evaluator. And I want to prove to you that the index right here is actually going to return a cell reference. All right, Formula Evaluator, formulas, evaluate formula. This is a great trick to see how formulas are calculating. I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut Alt-Tuf, Alt-T-U-F. There it is. I'm going to hit Enter or the Evaluate button to evaluate it. Notice it's looking at counta. Now underlined is index, and watch this when I hit Enter. It delivered a 10 because of that colon. Let's escape. I'm going to just put the number 1 here. Click here, Alt-T-U-F. Enter, Enter. And now you can see a dynamic range. Now it says A2 to A11 because it's sensing that that's the last value. I'm going to click Escape. All right, now watch this. I have to create 1, 2, 3 more for each one of these columns, B, C, D. I'm going to do a little trick here. Make sure everything's locked in all directions. I'm going to drag this over. So I'm just going to quickly, instead of recreating it from scratch, I'm going to change this to B, this to B, this to B, this to B, and this to B. Control Enter, or Control Shift Enter, and there you go. So you can see it's looking at the right range. If I highlight this and hit F9, you can see sure enough it's delivering just as we suspected the whole range. Escape. Now here's another trick. In our last video, we did find and replace. Well, check this out. We could find and replace $A and tell it to replace with $C. The reason why we can't just search for A is because there's an A in the counta. So watch this. I'm going to highlight 2 cells. If I highlight just 1 cell and Control H, it'll try to do everything in the sheet. But if I highlight, I'm forcing it just to look at these 2. Control H for find and replace. If you can't remember that, Control F and then click on the replace. Control H, find what? $A and replace it with tab, $C. And then I'm going to click Replace All. 5 replacements, click OK. I'm going to double click just to make sure, and sure enough. Now, whether or not you edit one each individually or use find and replace is your own preference. I'm going to highlight this. Control H. I'm going to find $A and replace it with $D. Replace all. Click OK. So that's using find and replace to find parts inside of a formula. All right, now we're going to copy and paste these into our define name dialog box, which is the name manager. So I'm going to copy this, Control C, escape, name manager, or Control F3, new. And I'm going to call this date dr for dynamic range. I'm going to come down here, Control V. Click OK. And I'm going to test it. In this dialog box, if you click this, it should highlight exactly our range. Escape, escape, escape. I'm just going to test that again. A 1, Control F3, date dr, and click right there. Look at that. The dancing ants are dancing around a just slightly increased range. Escape, escape, escape. I'm going to delete that. All right, now copy, Control F3, new, product dr, Control V, click OK, and test. Looks like it's working just fine. Escape, escape, escape. I'm going to come here, copy, in edit mode, escape, Control F3, new sales rep, dr. Control V, click OK, test. Looks like it's working. Escape, escape. Copy this in edit mode, Control C, escape, Control F3, and new. This will be sales dr. Hopefully I didn't type any of that incorrectly. Control V down here, click OK, test. All right, so they're all their sales dr, sales rep dr, product dr, and date dr. I'm going to click close. Now, obviously, you would not put data below a column. In large part because the count, if I had the whole column selected, the count would pick this up and it would go down one too far. I just did this to fit it into the screen for the video. Now let's make a chart and check this out. Now I'm just going to cheat and create the chart this way. Highlight, and what's our keyboard shortcut for the default chart? Alt F11. All right. We could make this chart as fancy as we wanted. I'm not going to worry about the formatting so much, but I am going to worry about inserting the dynamic ranges. And it's going to do something a little bit odd. I'm going to click. I'm going to do it two ways because there are multiple ways to do everything. Select the columns, and lo and behold, up in the formula bar, the series function. This is a function that doesn't work in the sheets, but is always in play when you have charts. It links the cell content, your chart inputs, to your chart. All right, so series, the C column, that's sales rep. So I'm going to highlight this up in the formula bar and type sales rep dr. I hope I can type correctly. And then I'm going to hit enter and watch what happens right here. Watch, enter. It puts in the workbook reference by default. When you do that, you have to leave the actual sheet reference and explanation point and highlight just the range. It's kind of a bizarre method of doing this. But once you do that and put your name in and hit enter, it puts the workbook reference. It's just saying, hey, I know that this name is in this workbook. Now let me show you a second way, because there's another method to put the dynamic define name ranges formulas into our series function. That putting it up in the formula bar is a little bit harder because you have to type it. All right, I'm going to select the chart, and this is the easy way. Design, select data. Now we already did this, so I'm going to click edit, and sure enough, you could see that it's already there. Click OK. And over here, now just as we mentioned in the chart video, this is the real power of charting, knowing how to use this dialog box, whether to add, edit, or remove. I'm going to edit. And that one's fine. It's this one right here. Now watch this. Remember, you got to leave the sheet name in the explanation point, highlight the range, and now all I have to do is hit F3 F3 is the paste name dialog box. So if I'm doing this for lots of charts and lots of ranges, I may not remember the names of all of them. So I'm going to go down to Sales DR and double click. Now, again, same thing. Sheet reference, exclamation point, and define name. When I click OK, and then go back and look at edit, you could see the workbook reference is in there with the define name. Click OK, click OK. Now let's test it. I'm going to drag this down a little bit. Get rid of that and so I'm going to put a date here, whatever it might be. And then chin. And then now, look right here. When I type this number here, I'm going to put 2000. Sure enough, now there's a new column added. That is a dynamic chart that changes depending on our inputs here using defined names. Now, that's quite a lot for this video. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually use these defined names in a really complicated wild array formula. So this next formula is kind of beyond the scope of this book, but we'll end this way. And if I ever write another book, it'll be about these wild array formulas. Now I'm actually going to delete this just so I have a little bit room here to play around. And you can see when I deleted it, it's gone. Right there it is. There was 2 chins there, one with 2000, and now it's gone. So the dynamic ranges really work. Actually, let's test it. Look at that. Control Z. Now we are going to have to, I'm going to leave that down there. We're going to have to create one more defined name for the whole table. So I'm going to come down here and just in this cell, I'm going to say equals A2 index. I'm going to lock this A2 with the F4 key. I'm going to grab the entire range table, including as many rows below as I need, and F4. Okay, that is the array, comma. Now, what do I need here? When we did our column, we just needed the first cell and the last cell. But here we need the uppermost left column and the lower right cell, right? So the top cell, lower cell. So we're going to actually, since we have a 2-dimensional range here, we're going to have to give the index a column number and a row number. All right, so the row number. Well, we'll just use our same trick. Now, count yeah, and I'm going to use this range right here. F4 to lock it. Close parentheses. So that'll give us a row. Anytime we add a new record, it'll give us a new row. But what about the column number? Well, for us, since our data set, we could use counta and extend way past here, but this data set only has 4. So guess what? I can just type a 4 in. It's only the rows that will expand. Close parentheses. And now we can highlight this and check it out as a dynamic range, F9. And sure enough, it got all the way to the end. Control Z. I'm going to Control Shift Enter. Remember, I'm just leaving these here in the cells just in case I need to access them later. But let's copy this, and now I can put this Control F3. And I accidentally left my range in here that I used before. I'm going to edit this and quickly delete this. That's the name I wanted to use. So I'll just pretend I just typed my dynamic table. How about that? And now I'm going to click right here and Control V with our formula. Click OK. All right, let's test it. Sure enough, it looks like it's working. Click Close. Now, we want to come up here to I3. All right, so what we're going to do with this setup here is we're going to use 2 formulas, one here for counting and one here for extracting records. And we want to be able to extract records based on certain criteria. Now, we've seen lots of ways to do this. Advanced filter was just awesome for extracting records. Same with the regular filter feature. In fact, that's probably the best way because it's the easiest, least complicated way. However, some people want to have formulas that extract records. And almost always, the reason you'd switch over to a formula, because it's going to be really complicated compared to our other options of doing this, is when data changes a lot. Now, so we're going to have these wild formulas that will change based on criteria, but we're also going to use our dynamic ranges so they'll accommodate any new records. All right, first we have to count. We have an OR and an AND. We want to count how many records in this data set are sunset or quad, and the year is 2011. So the logic, just as we learned in the formula chapter in the advanced filter and filter sections, for an OR criteria, what we're going to do is we're going to look at every record. And for the product, we're going to say, is this equal to sunset? True. As soon as it gets a true, that's OK. It can ignore this because this is an OR. But through every record, down here it's going to say, is this equal to sunset? False. Is this equal to quad? False. So that, oh, no, it is equal to quad. So there's a true there. But here it's going to get sunset or Carlota equal to sunset, false. Carlota equal to quad, false. Anytime it gets two falses, then that record is excluded. Now, because that's the OR, we also have the AND. So it's really sunset or quad and year 2011. So here it goes, sunset true, and is this the year 2011? True. So when it gets two trues, it extracts the records. All right, now how are we going to count this? We have an OR here. And we could use a couple different count ifs and add them together. And back in the formula chapter, we saw how to do that. But I'm going to use the sum product and show you how to construct OR criteria and criteria using something called Boolean logic or Boolean math. All right, so you ready? Let's do sum product. And I'm actually going to scroll over. We don't need to look at this data set because we have our defined names. All right, and first, we need to create some arrays of trues and falses. Now, we have an OR criteria. So here's how OR criteria works. I'm going to put one parenthesis and a second parenthesis. Now, I need to ask a question about the product. So I'm going to hit F3, that's paste name. And I'm going to double click the product dr. Is anything in that column equal to sunset? Now I'm going to lock this F4 because we're actually going to use the same construction for trues and falses in this formula and also down here. All right. Then this is an OR criteria, so we use addition. And then we say, again, is the product dr equal to quad, F4. Now, the reason we use addition is because, get this, this is an OR. And there's never going to be a record that's both sunset and quad. So when we get a true here for sunset, the parallel item in the array over here will be 0. Similarly, when we get a 0 here, if the item over here is quad, it will be a 0 plus 1. If they're both false, it'll be 0 plus 0. So that's the reason when you have OR criteria, you use a plus. Now, in some situations, you can have OR criteria where there's overlap, and then you have to do a different construction. But for us here, forget it. This is a column. It can never have both. There can never be two trues for a record with our OR criteria. By the way, if you had to do if you had a situation, which sometimes there are, where you can have a true and a true, which some OR does, you'd have to do something like only when it's equal to 1. Right? And so that would give you your trues and falses, and you can convert them, those trues and falses, to ones and zeros. Now, let's think about our situation here. We need to multiply one set of ranges, these trues and falses, times the array we create for our trues for 2011. Now, with AND criteria, you multiply. And we've actually talked about this a lot in the earlier videos on array formulas and some products. If we get, because we're going to get a series of ones and zeros for our OR criteria. But we need to multiply that times the trues and falses for years. So we get a 1 times a 1, and that would indicate that both criteria are true. All right? So we're going to take this array right there and multiply it times, and we're in parentheses. Now, we have the problem that we've seen in earlier videos. We have a year input and serial numbers. No problem. We know how to deal with this. We use the year function. And I'm going to put my dynamic range. I'm going to hit F3, and I'm going to go to date dr. Anytime year, close parentheses. Now you can just highlight this and hit F9 and see that that gives us all the years from serial numbers. I'm going to say anytime that is equal to this, and then close parentheses. Now I'm going to enter this and then run Formula Evaluator just to show you how the OR works and the AND. All right? So it looks like we have 4 records that match. And we can visually see that that's true. Now let's take a look at this. What's happening here? Now I've already entered this formula, right? So now I'm going to evaluate multiple times in a row, because if you F9 and then F9 again and enter the formula, it'll put those hard code those values in. Not only that, but you can't F9 2 times in a row like this, because Control Z only works 1 time in edit mode. So if I Control Z and then try and Control Z again, it won't get to that second one. So you got to be careful. That's why I entered it first. All right, notice true, true, false, 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 true, false, false. If you look through this string here and this string here, there's never a situation where you get both 2 trues. But watch this. I'm going to add these. So I'm going to, there's the plus symbol right there. I'm going to add. The action of any operation, whether double negative, adding, multiplying, dividing, will convert trues and falses to ones and zeros. So when I hit F9, there it is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's 5 instances of quad or sunset. So this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So no problem. That's how the OR works. It added those. And now let's see how this second criteria works. I'm going to hit this, highlight all of this, right like that. Oops, just this part. And then hit F9. Now, these are trues and falses. There is a true from our OR criteria here and 1 here. So when they multiply, 1 times true will be 1. Here it will be 1 times true is 1. Here it will be 1 times true is 1. So far we have 3. 0 times false, 1 times false. So that one is eliminated because it doesn't match on the year criteria. False. And then finally we have our last one, 1 times true. So it looks like there's 4. Now I can highlight all of this, and we can see our resultant. By the way, so multiplying is for AND criteria, and plus is for OR criteria. All right, F9. And there we have it, 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's going to give us our count. Now I'm going to escape because I did a lot of F9ing all in a row. All right, so that's the fancy formula. Now, cool thing about doing it this way is we have to use this same logical construct down here in our array formula to extract records. You know, we can test it too. We could come down here, change this to a 12, right? And it's updating. Control Z. All right, now, this is going to get wild here. But we do have to use that same construct. And we're ultimately going to use the index function. And the index function is going to allow us to find whichever, in all of these cells here, allow us to look up, do a 2-way lookup. So for example, in this cell right here, since this is the second record that matches the criteria, in this product cell right here, we're going to have to tell index to look through this whole range, go to the second row and the second column, and we'll take that and dump it right there. So the tricky part here is going to be the row, because look, we have record, record, record that match, but then the final record, so that's record 1, 2, 3. But way down here, this is 8. So the 8th record is going to have to show up in this row here. So the hardest part of this formula is going to be how are we going to get the rows for the index function 1, 2, 3, and 8? Well, let's see how we're going to do this. I'm first going to do an if. And the logical test is going to be Control V, that whole thing we just did. Let's see if we got all our parentheses right. Now we have to force the addition before the multiply, and that's why we had to put our green parentheses around those. And then finally, we had to force this equal sign before the multiplying, so we had to put the year in parentheses. But no problem. That's working just fine. We saw how it was working up here. Logical test, comma. Now, the value if true, and we saw back in the array formula video how we can use the if to deliver multiple items. And we want the row numbers 1, 2, 3, 8. So watch this. Any true from here, I'm just going to say, hey, give me the row. Now, the row function will give us row numbers. So if I click in a particular cell, like right here, it'll say, hey, this is in row 6. Now, I want to get the rows from our date column. So I'm going to hit F3 and double-click date dr. Now, the problem with this so far, if I highlight this and hit F9, it's going to give me, 2, 3, 4. That is not what I want. I really need this one to be a 1, 2, 3, etc. No problem. Control Z. We subtract from this. And I'm going to click in A2 and hit lock it. Right now, this is saying 2 minus 2, 3 minus 2, 4 minus 2. Well, if we highlight this and hit the F9, that's not going to work either. 0, 1, 2, 3. We really want 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. So Control Z, we add 1. Now, the reason we do this bizarre construction right here, and I'll hit F9, is because that, no matter if you insert rows above the data set or insert columns or you move this somewhere else, that little construction will always give you exactly 1, 2, 3, all the way to the last item. Control Z. Now, check this out. That's the value if true. Well, what? This is going to give me all the rows? No problem. It's not. We're going to get an array with just 1, 2, 3, and 8. And why? Because the first part of the if will tell us all the trues. All right, so let's close this off. There's the value if true. Should have had the screen tip up here. And guess what? We don't, let me go back here. We don't need a false, because if you leave the false off, it'll put the word false there, and that won't be a problem at all. So I'm going to close parenthesis. And now let's highlight this and hit the F9 key. And there, that's a very tricky way of getting only the rows we want. Now, our next problem in this extract data formula is as I copy it down, right here I need for record 1, 2, 3, and 8, I need record 1, 2, 3, but 8 needs to go right here. No problem. We can use the small function. The small function, Control Z, we'll look at this array, and as I copy it down, it will take the first smallest, the second smallest, the third smallest, and finally the fourth smallest, and that will be in this row. All right, so Control Z. We're going to use the small. This is an array created inside our formula, so we put it inside of small. Now, the last little tricky part here is going to be, well, that's the whole array. We saw it's got all the numbers we want, but I'm going to hit comma and get to this K. Now, in this row, I need the number 1, but here I need 2, here I need 3, and here I need 4. No problem. There's an easy way to increment numbers in formulas. Now, I'm going to put the number 1 here and close off this and Control-Shift-Enter just for a moment. And I want to come down here. We need 1s all the way here, and then 2s all the way here, and 3s and 4s all the way here. We could do that by using the rows function. The rows function tells us how many rows in a range there are. Now, our formula is going to be in F7. So I'm going to type $7 F7. Right now, I'm locking the row reference right there, but that one's not. So watch what happens. This is an expandable range. I'm going to enter. Look at that. It's a way of incrementing numbers inside of other formulas. And how does it work? Well, now it's got a 7 to 8 because it was locked up here, the 7, but the 7 wasn't, so it moved to 8. How many rows are there from 7 to 8? 2. How many rows from 7 to 9? 3. But watch this. It'll work perfectly this way. It'll give us all ones. Because as we move this over, we're still in the same relative row, so the 7s remain the same. And as I copy this down, is that amazing? We're going to use that inside of our small. Actually, I'm going to copy this. Now notice I'm in F7, and I'm going to paste in the K argument here. I'm going to paste this. This is one of the few situations when you can actually use the cell reference that the formula is sitting in inside of the formula. All right, let's just see if this will work. Because remember, we need our small is supposed to deliver ones in this row, 2s, 3s, and 8s. So I'm going to Control-Shift-Enter, Control-Shift-Tilde to wipe away the formatting. Copy it over and down. Now, I did some cell reference wrong there. Yeah, I forgot to lock that one. So I'm going to hit F4. Control-Shift-Enter. I'm going to drag it over and drag it down. Look at that. Is that cool? That whole gigantic thing there, the whole purpose of it is simply to give the index function the right row number. Now watch this. If I change this criteria up here to 2, now there's only one record that matches, so we get 5s here. Now I'm going to Control-Z. We'll deal with the nums in just a moment. Let's just see if we can slap this inside of the index and get our data extract formula working. Remember, I know this seems unbelievable for people learning array formulas, but that whole thing is just used to create a single number. All right, so index. And for the array, I'm going to highlight the whole table, except for we need our dynamic range. I'm going to hit F3, and I think it's called My Dynamic Table. So there's the array. I'm going to type comma. That whole thing there is row. The last thing or the second to last or penultimate thing we need is our column number. Okay, so column. Well, there's only 4 columns, and that's never going to change. So we need, as we move our formula this way, we need column 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we go down to the next row. We need to repeat 1, 2, 3, 4 again. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm going to enter just a 1 here, close this off, Control-Shift-Enter, and I'm going to come down here and show you how we can create a little formula piece that'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Same thing as the rows. We're going to use the columns function. And I'm going to be sitting in F7, so I'm going to type $F7. So the column reference is locked, but not the row reference. I'm going to enter this, and no way. Whoop. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way down. Again, the same thing. We have an expanding range, except for now the column is locked. So as I move this way, come over here, it's column F to I, because I didn't lock this one, this column reference, but I did lock this one. And when you go down, the columns are still relatively in F, so those didn't move, but the 8s did. So it's still, when we drag it this way, again, it's F to I. There's 4. All right, so I'm going to copy this, and that's our input for the column number. Control-V. Now you ready? Control-Shift-Enter. Now we're going to have to do some formatting. I'm going to Control-1, date. Click here, Control-Shift-4. Now I'm going to copy these down. And there, it has extracted first, second, third, and 8th record with the formula. Now we need to deal with these num, not a problem. Notice we did a count up here. The whole reason we did the count is because anytime the formula gets down, this is row 1, 2, 3, 4 for the extract area. Whenever the row number in the extract area is greater than our count, we need to show a blank. That means we want one of two things in the cell, either the gigantic formula or a blank. So the if function is perfect. We're going to put one of two things. I'm going to come up here, and at the very beginning, I'm going to type if. And we're going to use we're going to cheat. I'm just going to use the same little incrementer here. Because this gives us row 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as we go down. It's the way you think of this is a number incrementer inside a formula. Anytime that is greater than our count, F4 to lock that cell. That's the logical test, comma, and what do we want? Well, if it's greater than, we want double quote. Double quote. That's the syntax for blank, for value of true, comma. We already have our thing, that big gigantic thing. So I come to the end, and I put a close parentheses. This is an array formula, so you have to enter it with Control-Shift-Enter. When I Control-Shift-Enter, that's me telling Excel that this is an array formula. You could see the curly brackets up in the formula bar. If you pull the formula bar down, you could see curly bracket, curly bracket. That's Excel telling you, yes, this is an array formula. So now I'm going to copy this over and immediately point to the smart tag and say fill without formatting. Double click and send it down. All right, so now let's try this. That is wild. I'm going to come over here and change this to Carlota. I'm going to test. So I've tested the criteria. It's working. Now I'm going to come over here and type. That's an 11. I don't want a Carlota. Whoa, that's a problem. So when we enter something here, it messes up. OK, let's see if we can fix that. This will be Bellin. Oh, notice when we enter our second thing, it goes back. And this will be quad. And I'm going to say 2000. Oh, I entered the wrong. So I'm going to put chin and quad here. All right, so now we can see it's working dynamically. If we add new records, it updates. If we change the criteria, it updates. Now we want to come over here and fix that error we saw. I'm going to come over here and just type something. So we're getting an error here. I'm going to start here and look at this. I'm going to run the formula evaluator, Alt-TUF, try and track down where the problem is. This is a great trick. Enter, enter, or evaluate. So right there, right at the beginning of the evaluation, so the NA is coming from this cell over here. So I'm going to click Escape. Now I'm going to come here, Alt-TUF. And now it's looking at the product column. And I'm going to click Evaluate. It's still going. It's still going. It's still going. I'm watching it go. When do I get the? OK, so now it's got this one and it's this one. It's going to multiply them. Oh, OK. So value right there. Value means there is no there's a W there. Oh, even if I put a number there. But let me click Evaluate. I don't think that's causing the problem. I just realized what the problem is. Back from our study of, let's try putting a date here. So I'm going to put a 1 there. So we're still getting the problem. Here's the problem. Back when we studied some product cannot, we have product and the date columns. Some product cannot handle arrays of different dimensions. So this has one more row than this. So no problem. Here's what we're going to do. We'll use in 2007 a new function came out. It's called if error. And all we're going to say is, if there's an error, please put a 0 in this cell. And then this formula down here, which is asking, is the row greater than that? It will say false, and it will show a blank throughout here. This one will be showing a 0 because there's no match criteria yet until we finish our record. Down here, it will show blank. So boom, that's our solution. I'm going to scroll over just a little bit. This is a great function, if error. It's great because you only put your function that calculates the answer or an error, and you come to the end. You tell the if error what you want in the cell. I'm going to type a comma. What do you want in the cell? If it's an error, I'm going to put 0. Close parentheses, Control Enter. And there we have it. So as we're entering our new record, when it's blank, it shows the answer. But as we're entering our new record, it'll show 0 and blank. And then as we go down here, so I'm going to type a quad, and then chin, and then 2000. All right. Wow, that was an amazing way to finish the book with defined names, defined name formulas, dynamic ranges, charts with inserting dynamic range formulas into charts, even how to do a Boolean logic up here, and a wild array formula for extracting data dynamically. All right, we'll see you next video.